During the Great Depression, millions of American families survived on meals that were cheap, filling, and simple enough to make with almost nothing. One of the most common dishes was potato soup. It wasn't considered special food. It was survival food. In small towns and farming communities, families often had very little money for meat or fresh ingredients during winter. Potatoes became one of the most important foods in the country because they were inexpensive, easy to store, and could feed an entire family for days. Many mothers would quietly stretch a single pot of soup across multiple meals just to make sure everyone had something warm to eat before bed. The recipe changed from house to house depending on what people could afford. Some added milk when they had it. Others used only water, potatoes, onions, and salt. Sometimes leftover bacon grease was added simply to create more flavor. Despite its simplicity, the soup became deeply connected to comfort and survival during difficult years in American history. Even today, older generations still remember the smell of potato soup filling small kitchens during cold evenings. And honestly, it still looks surprisingly comforting. If you wanted to make this forgotten Depression-era meal today, you would only need a few simple ingredients: 4 large potatoes, 1 onion, 2 tablespoons butter, 4 cups broth or water, salt, black pepper. First, peel and dice the potatoes into small chunks. Then, chop the onion and cook it slowly in butter until soft and slightly golden. Add the potatoes and broth into the pot and let everything simmer for about 25 minutes until the potatoes become tender. Some families would mash part of the soup to make it thicker while leaving a few potato pieces whole for texture. Finally, add salt and black pepper to taste. That's it. Simple. Cheap, warm. A meal once eaten by struggling American families nearly a century ago. And somehow, it still feels like comfort food today. Few dishes represent 1950s American kitchens better than tomato aspic. And honestly, to most modern people, it looks incredibly strange. Tomato aspic was a cold gelatin-based dish made from tomato juice, vegetables, spices, and gelatin poured into decorative molds. During the 1950s, it became extremely popular across the United States, especially at family gatherings, church dinners, and holiday parties. At the time, refrigerated foods and molded gelatin dishes were considered modern, elegant, and even luxurious. Many homemakers proudly served tomato aspic as a fashionable appetizer long before frozen convenience foods completely took over American kitchens. The recipe varied from family to family. Some versions included celery, onions, olives, or shrimp. Others stayed simple and focused mainly on seasoned tomato juice. Today, the dish often confuses people because the texture feels unusual compared to modern comfort food. Cold tomato-flavored gelatin simply isn't something most people expect to eat anymore. But during the 1950s, this was considered impressive cooking. And strangely enough, many older Americans still remember it with nostalgia. If you wanted to recreate this forgotten dish today, you would need 2 cups tomato juice, 1 packet unflavored gelatin, celery, onion, salt, black pepper, and a small amount of vinegar. First, warm part of the tomato juice in a pot and slowly dissolve the gelatin into the liquid. Then add the remaining tomato juice, chopped vegetables, vinegar, salt, and pepper. Pour the mixture into a bowl or decorative mold and refrigerate it for several hours until firm. The final result should hold its shape when removed from the mold. Some families served tomato aspic with lettuce, crackers, or mayonnaise on the side. And while the texture might surprise modern viewers, there's something oddly fascinating about these forgotten recipes from old American kitchens, because they remind us that every generation once believed its food would last forever. Few meals are more closely connected to old American comfort food than creamed chipped beef on toast. The dish became especially popular during the 1930s, 1940s, and post-war years because it was cheap, filling, and easy to prepare with simple pantry ingredients. For many working-class families, it was considered a practical meal that could feed several people without costing very much money. The recipe itself was simple. Thin slices of dried beef were mixed into a creamy white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, then served over toasted bread. It may not sound particularly exciting today, but during difficult economic years, meals like this became deeply connected to survival and comfort inside American homes. The dish also became famous among American soldiers during World War II. Military kitchens served it constantly because the ingredients were inexpensive, shelf-stable, and easy to prepare in very large quantities. Many veterans later brought the recipe home after the war, where it remained popular for decades. And despite its humble reputation, the meal carried a strange kind of nostalgia. For older generations, the smell of butter, toast, and warm cream sauce often reminded people of cold mornings, family kitchens, and difficult years that families survived together. Today, the dish has almost completely disappeared from modern restaurants, and younger generations rarely recognize the name at all. But surprisingly, many people who try it still admit it tastes far better than expected. To recreate this forgotten American classic today, you would need dried beef, 2 tablespoons butter, 2 tablespoons flour, 2 cups milk, black pepper, toast. First, melt the butter in a pan over medium heat. Add the flour slowly and stir continuously to create a smooth base for the sauce. Gradually pour in the milk while stirring until the mixture becomes thick and creamy. Then add small slices of dried beef and cook for several more minutes until everything is heated through. Finally, spoon the creamy mixture generously over toasted bread and add black pepper on top. Simple, heavy, warm. A meal once served everywhere, from family kitchens to military bases across America. And while it may look old-fashioned now, there's something comforting about recipes designed simply to keep people fed during hard times. During the Great Depression, millions of struggling American families learned how to create filling meals from whatever cheap ingredients they could find. One of the strangest examples was Hoover Stew. The dish became popular during the 1930s and was named after President Herbert Hoover, who many Americans blamed for the economic collapse and massive unemployment spreading across the country at the time. For many families, food budgets almost disappeared overnight. People stretched ingredients as far as possible just to survive another week. Hoover Stew was never considered elegant food. It was practical food. Cheap macaroni, sliced hot dogs, canned vegetables, and tomatoes were often combined into one large pot that could feed several people at once. The exact recipe changed depending on what families had available, Some versions included beans or potatoes. Others used leftover meat scraps from previous meals. The goal wasn't luxury. The goal was simply making enough food to keep everyone full. And despite its simplicity, the dish became deeply connected to survival during one of the hardest economic periods in American history. Entire neighborhoods survived on meals very similar to this one. Community kitchens and charity organizations often served large pots of stew to unemployed workers and struggling families waiting in long bread lines during winter. Today, Hoover Stew might look unusual or overly simple compared to modern comfort food, but during the Depression, meals like this carried enormous emotional importance because they represented stability in a time when many Americans were losing homes, jobs, and savings almost overnight. And strangely enough, many people who recreate the recipe today still describe it as surprisingly comforting, warm, filling, simple, exactly the kind of food people crave during difficult times. To make a traditional version of Hoover Stew today, you would need macaroni, sliced hot dogs, canned tomatoes, corn, beans, onions, salt, and black pepper. First, boil the macaroni until tender. While the pasta cooks, slice the hot dogs and lightly cook them in a pan with chopped onions until slightly browned. Then, combine the macaroni, tomatoes, corn, beans, and hot dogs into a large pot. Let everything simmer together slowly for several minutes so the flavors can blend properly. Finally, season with salt and black pepper. That's it. One large, inexpensive meal designed to feed entire families during desperate years in American history. And while the recipe itself may seem humble today, it tells an important story about how ordinary people survived hard times together with whatever food they could afford to place on the table. At first glance, vinegar pie sounds more like a mistake than a real dessert. But for generations of American families, especially during difficult economic periods, this unusual pie became a surprisingly important comfort food. The recipe dates back to early American settlers and later became especially popular during the Great Depression when fresh fruit was expensive, seasonal, or simply unavailable for many families. People living in isolated farming communities often had to rely on ingredients that could last through long winters without spoiling. Fresh lemons, berries, or apples were not always easy to find, so home cooks learned how to imitate familiar flavors using whatever they already had inside the kitchen. That's how vinegar pie was born, by combining vinegar, sugar, butter, eggs, and spices. Families created a filling that strangely resembled the sweet and slightly tart flavor of lemon pie. To modern audiences, the idea sounds incredibly unusual, but during hard times, recipes like this represented creativity and survival. And surprisingly, many people who try vinegar pie today still describe it as delicious. The flavor is warm, sweet, rich, and slightly tangy without tasting strongly of vinegar at all. In fact, some people compare it to a soft custard pie with hints of caramel and citrus. The dish became especially common throughout parts of the American South and Midwest, where families often passed down recipes through generations using handwritten cookbooks and memory alone. For many children growing up during those years, desserts like vinegar pie felt special because sweets were relatively rare during difficult economic periods. A homemade pie on the table could completely change the mood of an evening after long days of work and financial stress. That emotional connection is part of the reason these recipes survived for so long. Even simple desserts carried comfort, and unlike many forgotten dishes from the past, vinegar pie has quietly started returning in recent years thanks to people rediscovering historical recipes online. Some modern bakers now recreate it specifically because of its unusual history and surprisingly comforting taste. To make a traditional vinegar pie today, you would need 1 pie crust, 1 cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of vinegar, 2 eggs, butter, vanilla, cinnamon, or nutmeg. First, prepare the pie crust inside the baking dish. In a bowl, mix together the sugar, eggs, melted butter, vinegar, vanilla, and spices until smooth. Pour the filling carefully into the crust and bake until the center becomes lightly firm and golden on top. As the pie bakes, the sharp smell of vinegar slowly disappears and transforms into something warm and sweet. The final result looks surprisingly simple, but behind that simplicity is a recipe connected to generations of American families learning how to create comfort from almost nothing. And maybe that's why old recipes like this still fascinate people today. Not because they were luxurious, not because they were perfect, but because they remind us how ordinary people became when life forced them to survive with whatever ingredients they had left in the kitchen.